Derek Webber. Derek's a former satellite and rocket design engineer and former head of procurement at Inmarsat, responsible for buying over $1 billion worth of satellites and launches. He currently specializes in the commercial space business, especially markets and regulatory aspects of space tourism. Derek directed the ASCENT study for NASA, forecasting the requirements for the next generation of space vehicles after the shuttle, and also the Futron Zogby market survey of millionaires' space travel intentions. He's provided testimony to the President's Commission on the future of the US Aerospace Industry and is an adjunct faculty member for the International Space University. I'm delighted that he's here today to share what he knows and what he doesn't know about space tourism markets. Please welcome Derek Webber.
Well, thank you all for coming. I think there's a lot more I don't know than I do know. So it's one of the reasons for coming to Google, because you get a lot more brains involved in solving some of these problems, and we'll move along a lot faster. Because I think we seem to have stalled a little bit on space tourism. I'm going to start by talking about that. Then I'm going to move on to this last line about Pointtopoint, which is the latest development in terms of space tourism. And I'll explain how little we know about that. So what's happening? Again, I'm going to make the assumption that in Google, you all know what space tourism is. You've got Spaceship One hanging up in the lobby. I will ask, was anybody here in Mojave in 2004 to see Spaceship One go into space? Nobody. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk, first of all, about suborbital, which is what Spaceship One was designed to do. Suborbital, a lot of the market research was based on the assumption of a $100,000 price. Naturally, the first people to provide this service are going to cream the market, and Virgin Galactic are talking about $200,000 just to get the ball rolling, and they have a big line of people wanting to do it at that price. This particular slide just shows 4 alternative ways of doing suborbital. The one on the top left is the Virgin Galactic proposal, Spaceship Two, if you like. It's an extended version of the Spaceship One you have in the lobby. Again, it is launched by being suspended under a mother plane called White Knight 2. Takes it up to 50,000 feet. It's released, the rocket kicks in, and it goes straight up into suborbital space. The one on the top right is the X-Core vehicle, and that is a totally different approach. That starts off horizontally on the ground with rocket motors the whole way up. It just goes straight up. It can't quite reach the 100-kilometer mark, but you'll still be able to see black sky, and it only carries 1 passenger. So you sit next to the pilot. So it's the nearest thing to being an astronaut you can get, and they're going to charge $100,000 for that. This thing is being built in the hangar next door to Spaceship Two in Mojave. And bottom left is the rocket plane approach. Again, takes off horizontally, but it takes off using normal aircraft engines, turbojet engines, and only when it gets high enough, it switches to a rocket motor and then shoots up into suborbital space. And the one bottom right, even a week ago, I would have just said this is Armadillo's approach, but in the last week, another company, Marston, has produced an almost identical vehicle, and the idea of this is to just literally go straight up and straight down. Hopefully all under control. So this is the suborbital picture. Orbital, we used to think of this as a $20 million flight. The Russians have learned a lot about capitalism, and they keep putting the price up. The last tourist who did this paid $35 million. And now the US government is going to need a lot of these Soyuz, and the price to the US government is 51 million per tourist or government astronaut who will fly in these. So that's the Soyuz, top left. That's the workhorse for getting into orbit. It's been going for 40 years now. We have some alternatives coming along. On the top right is the SpaceX, that's Elon Musk's company, are developing something called the Dragon. And he intends to get that into orbit and take maybe 6 tourists in there. That might be the first US orbital space tourism vehicle. Orbital is developing something bottom left. At the moment, it's purely for cargo, but it will get into orbit so it can deliver cargo to the space station. If they succeed in doing that, the thought is they may also convert to taking passengers. And the one on the bottom right is a bit of a mystery. It's called Blue Origin, and I was never quite sure whether to include it under suborbital or orbital or something else, because they have a very secretive approach to what they're doing. This is the Bezos operation in Texas. But that thing you see there has flown and hovered and translated and landed. So it's going to, I'm not quite sure where it's going to end up. But that's roughly the orbital picture. And Pointtopoint is addressing the thing which, about getting to Australia. Essentially, it takes 90 minutes to orbit the Earth. So theoretically, you could get to Australia in 45 minutes. So if you could get something that just went into orbit or almost into orbit and came down again, you could do it. The kind of vehicle to do this is called a hypersonic vehicle, and they don't exist. A lot of people are talking about them. Company called Planet Space has this thing on the left called Silver Dart. And there's a guy in England developing something called Skylon. His company's called Reaction Engines. And also NASA is doing some developmental work. They have a thing called the X-51. But this is all very long way into the future. And from a commercial and a market point of view, I said, what is the price? Well, it's unknown. So, but I think point-to-point is much nearer to orbital than suborbital. So it's going to be much nearer to, you know, $20 million a flight than $200,000 a flight. Another thing as part of this space tourism development is the spaceports. The original spaceports were Kennedy Space Flight Center, Vandenberg. These were military places, and they were not suitable for the developing industry of space tourism, where you need the public to be able to come and go, you know, watch an IMAX movie, you know, bring the family, have a hotel, restaurant, buy hamburgers, the whole deal. And so the new kinds of spaceports are being developed to do this. Top left is Mojave, where Spaceship One and the X Prize took place. Top right is the Oklahoma spaceport, which in fact is an old strategic air command bomber base. Has enormous runways, superb for this kind of test phase of space tourism. That's where Rocket Plane is based. Bottom right is the proposed new Spaceport America in New Mexico. It looks really beautiful, blends in so well to the surroundings. The only snag is what it really looks like now is bottom left. So that's what it's at the moment. But they are hoping, and the Virgin Galactic intends to start flying at Mojave, top left, and when the custom-built spaceport America in New Mexico is operational, they will move to there. So a little thing about the trends. We've got some kind of a stall happening in space tourism right now. There was, Bert Rutan was the magnificent designer of Spaceship One and many different kinds of aircraft over the years. And he had a big medical heart problem, and that kind of slowed things. And they had a big accident out in Mojave. And it was an accident in an area of technology where nobody thought there was any risk. It was the standard rocket that they were planning to use. And I think that gave them cause to slow down and think it through a little. So that's part of the reason. Meanwhile, at the FAA in DC, the regulatory people are coming along and producing new rules and regulations, trying to not over-regulate it, because after all, this is like the Wright brothers. If the FAA was around when the Wright brothers were trying to get going, you know, I couldn't have flown over here yesterday. On suborbital, what's happening is Virgin Galactic, they have built the new mother plane for lifting Spaceship Two. It has started flying. It's had about 5 or 6 test flights, needs a lot more. They are building Spaceship Two in the hangar at Mojave. The X-Corps people in the hangar next door are close to having their links ready. My guess is the first White Knight 2, Spaceship Two combo for commercial use will be about 2011. That will be what I think you'd first start. And X-Corps links might fly even a year before that. As I say, it's only 1 passenger, and it doesn't quite get into, it gets to about 60 kilometers rather than 100 kilometers, $100,000. Rocket plane, again, they got stalled because of lack of financing. And it's hard to know really what's happening there. I think they're just in a holding pattern. And as I say, just last week, Marston came up with a new armadillo-type approach. On orbital, of course, Soyuz continues to be available. The Russians will sell them, you know, at 51 million or 60 million or whatever people will pay. But of course, it's needed, actually, for the International Space Station, and it's needed by the US. There's going to be 5 years when the shuttle stops flying, when we cannot get our astronauts into space without paying the Russians to do it for us. That's the situation, and so it's only when there's a spare seat that tourists get the opportunity to spend their money. There's a thing called the COTS program that NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center has put in place, which is the basis for the Elon Musk's operations. He's been funded by this program, and it's a very good program, and I think it's going to lead to the first US-based orbital tourism operation. He's building something called Falcon 9. We should keep looking in the press for that. This year, he'll be launching it. If successful, it's going to be a massive step forward for the non-governmental spaceflight business. And Bezos, all we know about his thing is that he calls it the New Shepard. So he understands that, in a sense, he's repeating what Alan Shepard did at the very beginning of the space program. That's what all suborbital space tourists are doing. They're repeating what Alan Shepard did. Alan Shepard did it, and he had the whole Pacific Fleet of the US Navy there to find him afterwards. This new space tourism approach, you just take off and they land at your same airport. Now, point-to-point is the latest area. There's a couple of things happening. There's a guy in Virginia invented something called the V Prize, which is the Virginia Prize. And he's trying to put together the rules, a bit like, you know, the Google Lunar or the X Prize. And his idea is he wants a prize for the first point-to-point vehicle leaving from Virginia Spaceport, which is critical to it, and landing somewhere in Europe. Again, don't hold your breath, but but if you hear the V Prize, that's what that is about. There's a group called the Fast Forward Group, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I'm a member of it, and we're just doing some of the very basic thinking about point-to-point. NASA is doing some work on the X-51, and ESA has at last funded the Skylon approach to the tune of $1 million, or euros. Okay, now let's talk in generic terms about all markets. What do we need to know? Well, this is a market which doesn't exist, so how do we know how big it is, how big it could be? Well, basically, all markets you approach the same way. You have to figure out what is the maximum size that could be if, say, price was no objective. So you can go out and ask people, you know, if price wasn't an objective, would you do this? And then you need to know about price elasticity of demand, and when price starts coming in and it really hacks away into what people are really capable of doing, then you have to figure out the shape of the S-curve, which starts from 0, has to reach this eventual point where the market is, and the shape depends upon how many suppliers are out there, at what price they're offering the service, and of course, how many providers also affects your own market share. I'm going to talk, I have 2 slides about the Futron Zogby survey. This is partly because I was responsible for doing it. It's also because it's the only survey out there, even though it's now 7 years old, that really looked into the markets for space tourism in a way that is statistically valid. So I want to spend just a few minutes explaining why that is. First of all, it's US only. We didn't have the money to look at the rest of the world, but it was widely sampled across the US. It was done through telephone calls in the days when fixed phones were the way of doing things. And it took 62,000 attempts to get the 450 millionaires that we were trying to contact. So this was a survey of millionaires. It cost about $150,000, which is why it hasn't been repeated yet. But I wish someone would repeat it, because everybody's using this for their business plan, and I kind of feel responsible. I'd like someone else to verify it, because this, if you think about it, in 2002, the X Prize hadn't happened. There was no Spaceship One. Nobody knew what we were talking about. And we tried very hard to explain what space tourism would be, but I'd rather like someone to do this exercise again today, when people are much more familiar with what it is. We gave realistic mission descriptions. In fact, we had a guy at Futron who was an NASA astronaut. He was a commander, a shuttle commander. And I got him to read all our language we were using in the questionnaires and the surveys to make sure it was realistic. And in fact, we asked the same questions many times. We asked that with just all a positive description of how beautiful and wonderful it's going to be. And then we said, oh, by the way, do you realize you might end up with backache and you'll be sick and all these kind of things? And we got a different set of answers then. And it's the second set we used in our forecasting. And then we also asked lots of background questions to validate and relate the answers to past behaviors. It's no good people saying, sure, I'll do that. And then you say, well, you know, okay, you're a millionaire. What's the most money you've spent in the last 20 years on anything? And they say, you know, well, I don't. What you find about millionaires is they don't go out lashing out money. That's why they're millionaires. Now, Grace has told me that these slides will be available for you all afterwards, so not to worry about all the detail in here, but I'll just pick a few points. So this was the main findings from the Futron Zogby survey. We assumed a $100,000 ticket price, and 12% of the respondents at that price, when fully informed, that means when they've been told about the backache and all that sort of thing, said they're likely to try and do this at the prices. The calculation comes out at $15,000 a year, people willing to do suborbital space tourism with the assumptions we used in this survey. And just to make the point clear, although we were interviewing millionaires, we didn't have a very good cross-section of millionaires, but we did, in developing the forecasts, we assumed that only people in the pool with more than 7 million were part of the pool that could be used. In other words, that if they were to spend $100,000, it would be less than 1.5% of their net worth. So that was an important sort of conservative assumption we used. On the orbital thing, because Futron Zogby looked at suborbital and orbital, we assumed a 20 million price, and we got a 7% response there. Again, we asked them, what would you do if you had a spare 20 million? And they said, you know, well, we'd invest it, you know. Serve them right, say I. I don't know what they would do now, but that's what they said then. And we came up with 50 a year market size with these kind of prices. And for that one, for orbital, we assumed that only people were in the pool who had more than $200 million of net worth. We did this because there was one tourist at the time, and it was Tito. And he had spent 10% of his net worth. So like any good market researcher, you know, one data point's good enough for me. so we used the 10% figure for that. But there's also other stuff in there. And again, on my website, the spaceportassociates.com, there's all these full documents are available for download if you want. I also did another survey later when I didn't have the funding to do a full statistically valid one. And I called this one the Adventurers Survey because it is not statistically representative. This was deliberately, I got these people from the website of Incredible Adventures. So this is a company that offers people, you know, go diving with the sharks off Bermuda and all this kind of thing. So these people are, risk is not a problem for them. But since they're likely to want to fly, I was interested in their views anyway. And I also asked them more sophisticated questions about the architecture of the vehicle. Would you rather land horizontally? Would you rather land on a parachute in the water, or whatever, whatever? We got some useful answers on that as well. I also asked them about spaceports. You know, does it matter to you which spaceport you'll be using? And the answer was, haven't thought about it. And I think that will change because basically from the heights we're talking about on suborbital, you can see 700 miles in any direction. Now, I'd rather, if I went up above Oklahoma, the Oklahoma spaceport, and I could see 700 miles in every direction, it would still look like Oklahoma. But if I was in the Caribbean or somewhere, then that'd be pretty. And Mojave, they get a nice view of the California coast and so on. So I think as time moves on, there'll be a lot more competitive activity between the spaceports. We got more data about risk, what they felt about risk. We also asked about corporate space tourism. One of the things that seemed like a possibility was, is this something that could be offered as a reward for, high-performing Google executives, get to go into space? Don't you think that's a great idea?
It gets coming.
Well, what happens is when you look at the results, they all say, well, I would go, but I wouldn't risk one of my best employees, or I wouldn't risk my best client, or I wouldn't risk, So it's a very different perception between your personal risk profile and that of your company. So the corporate space tourism needs a bit of work doing. Some were interested in EVA, that's getting out and floating around. We got some useful data about orbital duration, which is kind of interesting. You think, you're all good economists, if you pay, let's say, 30 million to go into orbit, all the hard work is getting up and landing, staying up there. So we asked them the question, would you like to stay 6 months, 1 week, 3 days, a year? You think that the rational economic man would say, oh, a year. But no, they say 2 weeks. So, so that is, people have lives, and that's basically reflected in the survey. And we also found that the people who were doing this were all big and heavy. So it was useful information for the designers, And in fact, you know, they're big and heavy and old. I mean, that's the other thing, you know, millionaires in general. I'm not, you know, present company accepted. So what do we know? We have a pretty good idea there is a market for space tourism, and there are service providers. You know, Virgin Galactic is definitely going to be out there. Sir Richard Branson has risked the biggest thing he has, which is his brand name, Virgin Galactic. What a wonderful name to call a company, Virgin Galactic. But he's risked that, and he's, you know, he's going to take care, and he's going to do it. So that's going to happen. He already has waiting lists, and we know roughly what the price points are. We know there's about $1 to $2 billion business here. That's what we know. What we don't know, we have very little idea, I'll show you shortly, about point-to-point. What is the point of point-to-point is what I'll be talking about. We don't know what will happen with the first fatal accident. A lot of people, in the financing community are worried about this. It's important, the industry is thinking about this a lot. And they're thinking ahead of the game. You know, there will be a first fatal accident, but the important thing is that it's not treated in the way that, say, like the Challenger or accident was treated. It's more like bungee jumping and the elastic snaps. It's an extreme sport, and people die climbing Everest and so on all the time. And so this is the mindset that's being developed for handling this eventuality. But it depends what the press does at the time. What the impact? So you're millionaires, and the 6 of you pay $200,000 to have 5 minutes in 0G, and one of your colleagues is sick. What do we do? Do we give the other 5 their money back? You know, can you imagine, you know, what that's going to be like in 0G? And or he bangs his head and it bleeds and there's blood, or you know, there are issues we don't know what's going to happen. But the FAA is concerned and looking at what sort of tests should be done beforehand. You know, what kind of what's the minimum requirements for to be accepted to be a space tourist. We don't know the impact of the location. We don't know if there's going to be US-based orbital vehicle. And I put this one down here, lottery potential. This is my, Buzz Aldrin keeps pestering me about this. He says, Derek, Futron Zogby is great, but it doesn't help me with my company, ShareSpace. He has a company, and he wants to have people, he wants to make sure everybody gets to go into space for the price of a share, $1 lottery, effectively. Now, apart from this, he has some legal issues to sort out, but he wants to know how many people would pay $1 for the chance of going into space. And I told him I haven't the faintest idea why anybody spends anything on lotteries. I don't. You know, it's not to do with economics. It's not to do with. It's a totally new area that I'm not competent in. So I keep telling him to find someone who knows about betting and lotteries. It's a betting idea, but it's Buzz Aldrin's idea, and he worries a lot about it. I mentioned, so now we're moving to point-to-point. There's a group just been formed. It's a very informal group, and it's called Fast Forward. You find my name, Spaceport Associates, near the bottom. It's people who are just generally concerned and interested in what might or might not happen in this field of point-to-point and hypersonics. Although there's a lot of names there's like about 4 of us who are regularly on the telephone once a month developing the thinking here. And the last name on here is probably the most important name. That's the non-attributable cargo company, because you know, I'm very much into understanding markets and customers. And we're starting off by looking at potential cargo markets. So I want to know real people who do this now and what they think about the possibility of doing it faster. So, but for some reason they don't want their name on the thing, so that's who they are. But there's there's only 3 of them. Okay, another little idea is some people think that point-to-point is just, you take that Spaceship One you have hanging in the lobby, you put a little bit extra motor in there, and when it gets to the top, you give it a kick sideways, and it comes down, instead of back at Mojave, it comes down somewhere else. Well, you can do the calculations, and you can find the best you can hope with this kind of approach is about 200 miles. If you can get enough power in there to do it, because basically you have about 6 minutes of a parabolic glide in order to get somewhere. And it works out at about 200. But you could go from, say, Las Vegas to Mojave or something like that. That might work, but you can't use it for intercontinental. What you need is a hypersonic vehicle, and this is a totally different thing, and it don't exist. It needs a totally new kind of engine, which doesn't exist. A lot of people are developing them and been researching them. And also you need thermal systems which are reusable. You fly this thing from San Francisco to Japan, and it comes in very fast and burns up whatever kind of a system you've got. You're going to have to replace it before sending it back again. So a lot of work needs to be done on reusable thermal systems, a lot of work on trajectories. And this is where the market comes in. What size of vehicle are we talking about? Is this something that's more like a business aircraft? Is it something like a Concorde? And every conference I go to, I listen to engineers, and they design the coolest thing they can find, and they don't worry about what the market is. They think, wouldn't this look great? And say, yeah, it would look great, but what's it for, you know? They say, well, it tests technology and it stretches everything. And you say, yeah, but what's it for? So I think the size of the vehicle is rather important. You know, the actual conditions on a flight like this, you get a lot of G. And of course, one of the problems with the Concorde was the sonic boom. You know, it certainly stopped it flying over the USA. This thing will have a sonic boom. How are they going to solve that problem? Is it going to land with engines or as a glider? Air traffic control is going to be interested in that. And then what sort of turnaround time would you need? So I'm going to address 3 questions about what it's for. Is it for cargo? And a couple of ones about for human. So we've done a little bit of work on the cargo side. We have not done any prime market research. We have not gone out and asked anybody. We except for the non-attributable cargo people. So we've got some basic data here. And what you find, we built a model, and the model assumed $400 a kilogram would be a price which is 50% premium on today's highest rate. When you do that, you find that there's only about 500 kilograms payload per trip, based on what people do today with somewhere like Federal Express or UPS. Express package delivery is only 15% of air freight, and within that, only 5% go for the highest rate, which is the quickest. So you keep getting smaller and smaller part of the market. And so you work that calculation through, and you find that, so the revenue per trip is only $200,000. I mean, if you're building this incredible vehicle, which is going to cost the earth to build, and you can't make it work at this. So, you know, we did this little piece of work. It's all on the website. The paper has some long fancy name. Is the world ready for high-speed cargo yet, or something is the title, but it's on my website. So the answer was no in this piece of analysis. Okay, so if maybe it's not for cargo, is it for business travel? You know, is this the thing? I mean, I hear it, even Sir Richard Branson, who's, you know, promoting Virgin Galactic, he keeps talking about this. He's saying, you know, once we've got this going, we're going to be doing London to Sydney in an hour and a half. And I think, I'm not sure about that, because it's very hard when you Google Concorde price history and so on. You get all sorts of a range of prices, but it seems like $10,000 one way was about the highest end anyone would pay. But suborbital flights are $200,000. Is a business person going to pay, you know, 100 grand or something to get, you know, a few hours faster to Sydney from London? I doubt it. That's enormous. It's like a 10 times premium over a Concorde price. And Concorde couldn't make money. So basically, it's another area that needs market research. It's easy to do. You just go and talk to people, you know, flying first class at Heathrow and ask them a few questions and get statistical valid, but nobody has done the work yet. At least no one has put it in the public domain. I put everything I can in the public domain, and I'm an avid reader of everybody else's who's put things in the public domain. So I like to find it out there, but I can't find anything about whether people would pay for this kind of a trip, any reasonable amount of money. So I'm left with kind of the third version, which I think it might work for, and that is, it's really just, it is space tourism, but it's a premium version of space tourism. It's someone, you know, after a few years going up and down over Mojave gets a bit boring. They'll pay more to go somewhere different, to the Caribbean or whatever. How much more would they pay? Would it be enough to pay for the development of this? No, the work has not been done as to, and then you've got all sorts of amusing return logistics. You know, how do you get your vehicle back? How do you get your passengers back? Or do you know, is it a two-way flight or whatever? But so I think there might just be a market for this, but I doubt that the numbers would turn out enough to justify the developments of a system like this. I suspect the real user of this kind of thing is going to be the military. And if the military need it, you know, to get 8 guys in a hurry to some other part of the world, then, you know, the space tourism guys will be coming along behind and want to use the technology. But I can't see it being developed as a market-based commercial operation at the moment, but as I say, the work has not been done. There are some very interesting logistics about point-to-point, which you go in circles trying to solve these. Basically, how many spaceports do you need? If you're going to initiate, let's talk about cargo. Let's talk about FedEx, you know. At the moment, they could fly from LAX, San Francisco, whatever, to anywhere in the world. But these are special facilities for these hypersonic space planes. You're going to have to build them specially. How many would you need to have a sensible and complete cargo service? What maintenance facilities would you need there? Which spaceport pairs would be the ones that would get the most traffic? And of course, you're trying to save you know, 5 or 6 hours of delivery time. There's not much point if when you get there, you have to wait to get it through customs and, you know, through the normal procedures. They need everything needs to be quickened up accordingly if you're going to do this. It's not impossible, but it has to be part of the thinking from the beginning. Another interesting question on one of the papers on my site, I explore whether you could do this at all as a scheduled service. And as soon as you start thinking about a scheduled service, you start thinking, well, how many times a day would it have to fly? And you have to have an awful lot of them. Otherwise, you might as well just get the earlier slow plane. And so I came to the view that maybe you might need quite a small business jet kind of a thing, which only went on demand. It was just sitting there, and you just turn up and get on it, and it goes. But it's cool, but again, what is the market there? We don't know. going east or west? Fascinating question. When we first started looking at this, of course, all the FedEx and so on, they all talk about first day delivery, second day delivery, third day delivery. And the models started coming up with some funny answers, and you realize, well, actually, if you're going from London to San Francisco, you can just go in a 747 and you've got first day delivery. If you're going the other way, with the rotation of the Earth, you're losing a day all the time. So it does matter which way you're going. Then air traffic control for this kind of a vehicle is obviously a lot of difficulties. And the rather amusing one is the military considerations. This thing would be indistinguishable from an incoming ICBM if it was coming across the Atlantic to approach. So there's a lot of work needs to be done on that. Now, Grace asked me to talk about how soon are we going to go hypersonic to Australia. This man's name is Bond, Alan Bond. He has developed something called Skylon, and you see a model of Skylon hanging up behind him. On the left picture, you also see Alan Bond with a model called HOTOL, and my daughter Grace standing next to him 20 years ago. So in 20 years, we moved from this model to this model. So again, don't hold your breath on this. Although he has recently received 1 million euros from the ESA, the European Space Agency, to continue thinking about this. So it's not something that is imminent. It's exciting. All engineers would love to make this thing. But as I think I've made clear, no one knows what it's for. And I believe that is a start point. I wish someone would just spend a few $100,000, explore the market, decide what it's for, and then start building the thing. And this is kind of my last slide. I wanted to just, on a philosophical note, end with, does space tourism really matter? Is it just a fun thing for rich people to do? Well, of course, it's a very American thing. You can make $2 billion doing it. It's all about the pursuit of happiness, which I read somewhere was an American idea. And it's about pushing the frontiers and all that kind of thing. So, but also, I think it's an enabling technology, which is why I'm very keen in promoting the use of it. It's enabling because we as payloads, if we think of human beings as payloads, it's the only payload that's enough of to make a reusable space vehicle make sense. All the other kind of payloads, communication satellites, Earth observation satellites, whatever, you add them all up, you end up with 60 to 80 launches per year globally. Military, civil, Russian, American, everything. All adds up 60 to 80 a year, nothing else. But space tourism opens up enormous numbers and therefore enables this whole new reusable technology. It has to be reusable because you've got to get your people back again and up again. So it will bring about a more airline-like operation which will produce more reliability and lower cost to orbit. Reusability, lower cost to orbit, and then all users will benefit from that. So that's the story. That's my thank you, and I'm ready for questions if Grace will help me take the questions. And on the bottom of the slide, it tells you where you can find this presentation.
Yeah, we have it uploaded at Go Space Tourism, and you should find it up there almost the same format as a present link. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to try and repeat them into the microphone for the benefit of the video.
The commercial space industry has been very sensitive to downturns. So in the 80s and 90s, a lot of exciting companies, and then kind of extinction that happened as the demand side kind of disappeared. How are things weathering right now? Is that something that we get through?
So the question is, how is the industry weathering the current downturn, given its historic commercial space's troubles in downturns?
And I think that the real answer, the simple way to answer that is Sir Richard Branson. I mean, this industry is all being done by millionaires on their own dime, basically. And Sir Richard Branson is very serious, and he's going to make this happen. I don't know whether the slowing up is something that, he's held back a little. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's possibly safety related. He's just making absolutely certain the thing is going to be safe when it starts flying. But that's the difference. And the market, although, we are talking about millionaires, and millionaires have their money in stocks and so on. So there may be less millionaires now than there were when we did the survey. Last time I did the calculation, there were 8 million millionaires out there. There were 1,000 billionaires. But actually, one of the hardest things to find when you're doing market research is exactly the distribution of rich people. When you try and slice it up, it's very hard to find. And some of the best sources are things like Forbes magazine and so on. Even the tax authorities don't have what they were, particularly the tax authorities don't know where these people are. So that is a hard part, yes.
When you were looking at point-to-point cargo, did you examine what the maximum G-forces you could apply to the cargo would be? Because that would open up gun launching and unmanned services.
So for point-to-point cargo, have you examined the maximum G-forces the cargo can tolerate?
The answer is no, but you're right. I mean, it would be, if it's going to be used for cargo, there'd be less stringent requirements than for human. It's another reason for trying to decide what this thing is for, right up front. But no, the number of conferences I go to where they have beautiful models and simulations, and you almost really believe it's there, but they haven't thought about what it's for. And but you're right, cargo in some ways will be much simpler.
Yes?
You mentioned that point-to-point might be funded first by the military, using it for some application, and space tourism would pick up. Are you familiar with any projects currently being funded?
So are you familiar with any projects currently being funded potentially first by the military and then being picked up commercially?
The only thing I know about is that thing at X-51, which I only discovered about a month ago or a few weeks ago. It's the NASA, or maybe it's NASA DOD or something like that. But it's a very preliminary look at hypersonics. It's a long way from something that's deployable. But that's, the military has a good record of developing some of these technologies, and often you don't know till they happen.
Yes?
Another thing that's come along since 2002 has been zero-G, the commercial parabolic plane flights. Do you think that's adding to the space tourism market by getting more people interested, or might it be detracting by giving people a cheaper, safer way to satisfy their zero-G craving?
So how does the zero-G experience impact the space tourism market? Does it grow it or reduce the value of the market?
It's a good question, and we don't know, but I could even extend the question and say, there's a lot of things you can do that there's space tourism related that's on the ground. And simulations, and something that I'm concerned about is if a simulation gets to be so good, will people actually want to go anymore? We don't know, but in some of the market research we do, we actually extend it to include some of these like zero-G flights and so on. I believe that since Peter Diamandis is running zero-G, he's obviously it's in his interest to keep promoting the idea eventually of going into space. And so my hope is that it's an entryway into the suborbital space tourism.
Yes.
So for point-to-point, have you done any kind of analysis where you compare price, say, using net jets, taking a Learjet or whatever, multiply that out per Hypersonic versus, you know, Learjet or Cessna now?
So do we have any comparisons for point-to-point vehicles of this type versus the NetJet type model of jet sharing?
It's a good question, and you know, this I mentioned this fast forward group. We're just beginning to look at some of these things, and that's be an ideal thing to do a little bit of analysis on. We don't have the work done yet.
Yes.
How realistic do you think it's going to be the human rate Falcon 9? And how long do you think that's going to take?
How realistic is it to human rate the Falcon 9, and how long is that going to take?
Well, first we've got to fly it. Elon Musk has done amazing things. I mean, it's just been an extraordinary development. The SpaceX, you know, gang of 20 people. It's Google on rocket fuel, basically. And they have achieved a great deal. Falcon 1 has actually now orbited a satellite. They have assembled Falcon 9. It's sitting down at the Cape. They've tested the 9 motors in parallel on the ground, and they seems to be okay. But I started my professional life in the European space program a long time ago, and we had 12 launches of the Europa vehicle, and not one of them was able to get the satellite in orbit. So I'm used to taking, you know, a few goes before you get it right. But when it's your own money, it's rather than government money. It's you know, it takes, you have to be a little bit more careful. But I think we should see Falcon 9 flying this year. He's been on target with everything that he has set to achieve in the COTS program from the beginning, on schedule and the deliverables. So I'm crossing my fingers that he'll be successful with Falcon 9. Now, your next question is, how do you man-rate it, and how long was that going to take? Then you move away from you know, entrepreneurial and exciting things like space tourism, and you get into the government. Because the government gets involved in various forms with man rating. NASA has about a 900-page document about how to do it, and so we don't know how long that would take. But it's part of COTS. There's a thing called COTS-D, which if NASA would authorize it, then then Elon Musk will be funded to attempt to fly people to the space station. I think he said he could do it within 2 years. You know, add 1, make it 3.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one more. If not, I'd like to say Derek is going to be coming down for lunch at No Name if anybody else wants to have any other discussion following. And thank you very much for coming, and thank you for Derek Webb for talking to us today. Thank you.